I entered the bank with my daughter holding my arm with force disguised as care. The gesture seemed affectionate to anyone watching from outside, but the pressure of her fingers pushed me toward the counter, as if she wanted to guide me not to a service appointment, but to a destiny already decided. The environment, cold from the air conditioning, mixed with the expensive perfume she wore and the metallic smell of money circulating there. With each step, I felt my breathing become shorter, as if that spacious area, with white lights and polished floors, was a luminous trap ready to swallow me. On the table, a pile of papers was slid over hastily. Small print, endless columns of legal terms that seemed to dance before my tired eyes. My daughter, elegant in her blue dress, smiled at the employees, a rehearsed smile of a successful woman. To them, she was the dedicated daughter accompanying her elderly mother to a banking appointment. To me, it was enough to look at the rigidity of the muscles in her face to realize. This haste wasn't just about time, it was urgency. The pen was placed in my hand, heavy as a sentencing hammer. "Mom, just sign, don't complicate things," she whispered low, but her voice carried the weight of an order. I knew that tone well. It wasn't from a loving daughter, it was the same cold tone she used with store employees, or with waiters who took too long to serve her. The tone of someone who considers themselves above others. I looked around. The teller typed distractedly, but the customers waiting in line shot me looks of impatience. I saw an elderly woman rolling her eyes as if thinking, "This old lady is causing trouble." The security guard, tall and with crossed arms, analyzed me like someone who doesn't understand what a black woman with gray hair and simple clothes would be doing there, in front of papers of such value. He didn't say anything, but that look already said, "She doesn't belong in this place." My daughter noticed my hesitation and leaned closer. The breath of perfume and haste brushed my ear. "Trust me, Mom. It's for your own good." The words were soft, but the hand that squeezed my wrist betrayed impatience, almost contained anger. I felt my hands tremble, sweat dripping down the palm holding the pen. For an instant my eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to believe that the girl I rocked through feverish nights, whom I supported when she cried hidden after school, was now pushing me toward something so dark. I breathed deeply. I tried to read a line of the contract, but my daughter slid the paper back to her position, covering part of the text. She smiled at the manager who was approaching and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's stubborn, but deep down she trusts me." Discreet laughter arose around us, as if it were funny. My face burned. It wasn't just the humiliation of being treated as incapable, but the feeling of being reduced to a suspicious old woman, who doesn't know what she's doing. In that instant, a certainty fixed itself in my chest like glowing iron. There was something profoundly wrong in all that performance. And the worst of all was that the trap didn't come from strangers, but from the very daughter I had loved so much. I still didn't know, but that moment would be the first crack in a wall of lies that would soon collapse before everyone. I'm 67 years old and, contrary to what many think, I don't feel invisible. But in that bank, under the cold lights that highlighted every gray strand of my hair, I realized that everyone looked at me as if I were just an obstacle. I had always been called strong for carrying bags, cleaning houses and facing double shifts, but there, in front of contracts and disdainful looks, I found myself reduced to someone considered too fragile to understand her own destiny. I spent my life serving. I was a domestic worker from a very young age, cleaning windows that never reflected my entire image. I raised children with the little I had, sewed uniforms by lamplight, faced the jokes my employers made while smiling. "You're almost family," while they made me eat from different plates. I swallowed microaggressions like someone swallowing bitter pills. My daughter saw all of this. She grew up hearing conversations where I was treated as the trusted black woman. And perhaps, instead of being indignant, she learned to repeat the same logic. I was useful, but not worthy of respect. She always told me I wouldn't understand anything about business. That I should just trust, because the world was too complex for someone like me. First I thought it was youthful pride. But over time I perceived the poison hidden in each word. She looked at me as if I were a burden to be carried, not the root that sustained her tree. In that bank, I felt the security guard's eyes scanning my simple clothes, evaluating whether I really had an account there. He didn't say anything, but his posture already told me. This lady has no place in this modern space of bright screens and high figures. The manager himself addressed me slowly, like someone speaking to a child. "You just need to sign, it's nothing complicated," he said with a smile that wasn't welcoming but hurried, as if he was certain I wouldn't understand. And perhaps, to him, it was natural to believe that an elderly black woman could only be a present body, not a capable mind. But I always understood more than I let show. I learned from early on that silence is a weapon, that pretending distraction can be the best way to observe. While they laughed and rushed my hand to the pen, I recorded every look, every phrase, every detail. My daughter thought she was pushing me toward submission. But actually she was pushing me toward memory. And memory never forgets. I felt my heart tighten, not only because of the betrayal I was beginning to suspect, but because of a painful thought. Would everything I gave, all the poorly slept nights, the calluses, the sacrifices, be rewarded with the attempt to tear away the little I had built? In that instant, it wasn't just about the house or the money. It was my dignity that was at stake. And inside me, in silence, I made a promise. I wouldn't be destroyed by the one who should protect me most. I wouldn't allow my story to be stolen along with my signature. If you've been through moments when they tried to reduce you to silence, subscribe to the channel now. My story might be yours, and our voices, together, are stronger than any hidden contract. And little did I know, but that simple gesture of refusing the haste would open the way to a revelation that would change everything. My daughter didn't give up on the performance. When she noticed I was taking too long to sign, she called the manager with an elegant gesture, but loaded with disguised irritation. "She's stubborn, you know," she said in a loud voice so everyone around could hear. The manager's light laughter sounded like iron scraping glass. He leaned over me, hands joined like someone explaining something to a child. "You don't need to worry, it's just a simple procedure. Family is trust, isn't it?" That phrase pierced me like a dagger. Family is trust. I, who carried my daughter in my arms while I worked, who gave up medicine to pay for her studies, now heard from a stranger's mouth that I should sign without questioning, just because she was my daughter. It was as if my identity came down to a submissive signature. I felt the weight of the customer's gaze. A couple whispered, probably finding it funny, the suspicious old woman who didn't know how to sign a document. The shame burned my face, and I realized that, to them, I was nothing more than another elderly black woman who didn't understand the modern world. My daughter slid the papers closer, covering with her arm any attempt at reading. Her smile grew, but her eyes were hard, full of an impatience I knew well. It was the same look she used when talking to waiters who took too long, or neighbors who bothered her. The look of someone who thinks they have the right to demand obedience. "Sign now, Mom," she whispered, squeezing my arm again, this time so hard it almost left marks. I looked at her and, for a second, saw the girl I once cried with, when she came back from school saying they laughed at her color. I remembered saying, "You're beautiful, never let them diminish you." Now, this same daughter was using against me the same weapons she had sworn to fight. It was as if the world had turned around to put me again in the place of humiliation. But this time by the hands of my own blood. I swallowed hard. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble more than I already was trembling. I just let the pen rest on the paper and let out a slow sigh, which echoed in the silence. This silence seemed to bother her more than any scream. Her eyes flashed, and I perceived the anger hiding behind the impeccable makeup. She wanted haste, submission, obedience. But she found resistance in my silence. The teller, attentive to the movement, discreetly diverted his gaze to me. For an instant our eyes crossed. And in that brief encounter, I felt that someone had perceived my affliction. It was a quick instant, but enough to give me back a spark of hope. And it was in this moment, between the pressure of a daughter and the attentive look of a stranger, that I realized something unexpected was about to emerge, and it would change the course of that cold table of contracts. While my daughter insisted that I sign, I noticed something out of place. Among the well-aligned pages there was a discreet fold, almost imperceptible, as if a piece of paper was hidden. I leaned slightly, pretending tiredness, and let my fingers slide to the edge of the folder. Pulling carefully, I felt the rough touch of a paper folded in four. I disguised, holding it under the hand that already trembled naturally. I opened slowly, like someone cleaning glasses, and read in silence, swallowing the shock. Read before signing. They're trying to transfer your house and your savings. The letters were short, quick, handwritten. I recognized immediately that they weren't my daughter's. The note came from someone inside the bank, and out of the corner of my eye I noticed that the teller, the same one who had crossed eyes with me minutes before, looked away as if he didn't want to draw attention. My heart raced, but I needed to maintain a neutral expression. Any abrupt reaction and my daughter would notice. She in turn seemed restless. She tapped her fingers on the table, drumming with impatience. When she noticed I was hesitating once again, she leaned in and forced a smile in front of the manager. "Mom always takes her time. She doesn't understand these modern things," she said in a sweet tone, but one that hid poison. The manager laughed, as if my supposed ignorance were funny. Inside, an old anger burned me. It wasn't just about the papers. It was about all the years I had to swallow little laughs that diminished me, looks that disqualified me, phrases that treated me as incapable. The difference is that now I had proof in hand. That piece of paper was small, but carried more weight than all the contracts on the table. It was a warning, a silent weapon. I kept the note inside my purse, taking advantage of the moment when I dropped the pen on the floor. I knelt slowly, like someone suffering with age, and hid the paper among my things. When I got up, I feigned a shy smile. "It's a lot to read, my daughter," I said, acting fragile. She squeezed my hand hard and whispered almost through her teeth, "Trust me." But inside me, at that exact instant, something changed. I was no longer the hesitant mother before the determined daughter. I had seen the trap and, for the first time, I also had an exit. The fear that dominated me began to transform into something more solid, more dangerous. And in that false smile I offered my daughter, the silent revenge was born that I would still sow with each detail of my pain. I continued there, with the pen between my fingers, as if I was still fighting against my own indecision. Inside, however, I had already understood everything. My daughter watched me with that facade smile, but the pressure of her hand on my arm made it clear that the mask was hanging by a thread. The note burned inside my purse, as if it were a flame about to ignite all the farce. Still, I swallowed hard and let them believe in my fragility. Pretending was my weapon. While she insisted, I recalled every detail from the last weeks. The time she complained about my house, saying it was too old to maintain alone. The sideways glances from her husband, who barely hid his contempt when I occupied the living room. The low conversations, abruptly interrupted when I appeared. Everything fit together. They didn't want to take care of me, they wanted to get rid of me. In that bank, silence became an accomplice. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't ask for help. I just maintained the tired expression, letting everyone believe in the farce of the confused, elderly woman. And I realized how this bothered my daughter. The more I stayed quiet, the more impatient she became. The teller looked away discreetly, confirming to me that I wasn't alone. It was as if he said, "Hang in there." I felt the poison flow inside me, not the poison of betrayal, but that of contained humiliation. With each comment from the manager, each muffled laugh from customers, I swallowed the anger in silence, like someone saving bitter medicine to release at the right time. Because I already knew, an effective revenge isn't born from immediate screaming, but from strategic waiting. My daughter whispered, "Don't complain later. If we miss the deadline, it'll be your fault." She tried to shame me in front of everyone, turn me into a burden. But inside me, for the first time, I felt that I wasn't the one who was trapped. They were building, brick by brick, the stage of their own fall. If this part touches you, if they've tried to silence your voice with forced affection, like this video and leave your comment. Your experience matters, because stories like mine shouldn't remain hidden. And while I kept my silence that day, an idea began to germinate. I would transform that humiliation into a revelation that would echo much louder than any signature on paper. That night when I returned home, I let my daughter believe I was exhausted. I knelt slowly to take off my shoes, groaning on purpose, as if my body no longer obeyed me. She said goodbye hastily, satisfied with the theater of fragility I performed. As soon as the door closed, I raised my head and saw myself reflected in the hallway mirror. My eyes didn't show the weakness she wanted to see. There was an old flame there, which I had often needed to extinguish to survive, but which now returned to burn. I sat at the kitchen table and spread out my own documents. Certificates, contracts, account statements, everything carefully kept in folders my daughter always called old woman's mess. I touched each paper like someone caressing scars. There was the result of decades of work, sweat, and loneliness. There was my life written in ink and stamps. I wouldn't let anyone erase this story. I took the note and read it again, feeling the strength contained in those few words. Someone inside the bank had risked themselves to warn me. It wasn't just a warning. It was an opportunity. I discreetly called a lawyer that a neighbor had recommended to me years ago, a serene man, accustomed to listening more than speaking. I told him in detail what had occurred. On the other end of the line, his breathing weighed before the answer. Don't confront yet. Let them try. And bring witnesses when the truth comes to light. Those words echoed in me like a traced plan. I spent the following days pretending fragility. I walked slower, stumbled on purpose, complained of pains. My daughter believed every gesture, convinced that I was surrendered to time. She didn't realize that each false step was a calculated movement for her to lower her guard. At night, I wrote in a notebook everything I remembered. Dates, phrases said, exchanged looks. I gathered the pieces of a puzzle that soon would be assembled before witnesses. The silence, which before was only pain, now became my sharpest weapon. And while I planned in the dark, I began to feel that life itself was guiding me to an inevitable stage, where my daughter's mask would fall before everyone. A few weeks later, my daughter announced a family dinner. It's to celebrate new achievements, she said with a joy that seemed too rehearsed. I accepted the invitation without hesitation, maintaining my role as a fragile and grateful mother. I wore my best dress, simple but dignified, and arranged my gray hair carefully. When I arrived, the house was lit up, full of voices, laughter, and the aroma of expensive dishes that contrasted with the simplicity of my kitchen. I sat at the table, surrounded by relatives, neighbors, and some friends of the couple. My daughter circulated as the perfect hostess, distributing hugs and sweet words. But each time she caught my eye, I noticed a spark of impatience, as if she wanted me in absolute silence. Her husband, seated at the head, shot me a cold look, almost of contempt, before raising his glass for the first toast. Soon the subtle comments began, those that arrive like stabs wrapped in velvet. A daughter-in-law commented, laughing, "Such a big property for just one person. It must be a lot of work, right?" Another relative murmured, "It's past time to rest, let the young ones take care of things." Everyone laughed, as if it were natural to push me out of my own life. I swallowed the poison without showing it. Each word entered like hot iron, but I just smiled softly, like someone who doesn't understand the joke. Meanwhile, I observed my daughter's nervous gestures, the way her husband looked away whenever they mentioned money, the muffled whispers between relatives. It was like watching a play where I knew the ending, but pretended to be just audience. When the dishes were served and glasses raised for another toast, I felt my heart accelerate. There before everyone was the perfect stage. They wanted to celebrate over the ruins of my dignity, but I had already prepared my own toast. And it was at the instant when the glasses clinked that I realized. The hour of revelation was coming, and no one at that table imagined what I kept up my sleeve. I raised my glass with both hands, like someone who needs crystal to support the body, and let the chandelier light dance in the wine. Smiled. The room fell silent with the same curiosity that precedes gossip. "I want to thank my daughter for worrying so much about my future," I began, and I heard some approving laughter. That laughter offered like window display applause. I breathed deeply. So much that today she almost got me to sign my own ruin. The glasses stopped in the air. The remaining laughter withered in the first sip not taken. My daughter froze, the smile stuck like poorly applied makeup. Her husband disguised a throat clearing, but the sound came out harsh, guilty. I set down the glass and took from my purse a brown envelope, worn at the edges. My hands, which they called trembling, opened the clasp precisely. I spread on the table the authenticated copies, the draft donation of my property, the authorization to move my account, the power of attorney for my security. Papers designed to seem like affection, but that smelled of cowardice. Beside them I placed the folded note, the same one the teller left under the contracts that day. Read before signing. They're trying to transfer your house and your savings. A whisper tore through the room like wind under a door. I, who so many times was treated as someone who doesn't understand, was now the only one who knew exactly what was happening. My daughter tried to laugh, and her laughter sounded like cutlery hitting an empty plate. Mom, what an exaggeration. It must have been a misunderstanding. The husband stepped forward. Yes. A paperwork error any manager can explain. I brought their documents close to mine and showed the blank signatures, the marked spaces, the urgent deadlines. I didn't tremble. I looked at the guests, relatives, neighbors, the same ones who minutes before made jokes about a house too big for one person. They call this care. I call it fraud. I saw looks fall to their own plates, others fill with silent shame. A daughter-in-law pressed her lips, acting neutral, but her hand trembled reaching for the napkin. Someone tried to change the subject, ask about the food. I pointed to the papers one last time, with the calm of someone finally collecting their own dignity. I brought copies for anyone who wants to read. I don't ask you to believe me. I ask you to read. My daughter then lost her window display sweetness. She approached and the tone emerged cutting. Why are you doing this, Mom? You're embarrassing me in front of everyone. I fixed my eyes on hers, the same eyes I had sought to protect for years. I'm not embarrassing you. I'm showing you. Her husband let slip it wasn't supposed to come out like this. Too low for the toast, loud enough for the room's ear. Relationships break in these oversights. A cousin asked to see the documents. A neighbor nodded, indicating she recognized the format of that suspicious power of attorney. The table began to lean toward the side of truth, not because of my voice, but because of the weight of evidence. And it was there, with all the chairs still warm, that I decided to cross the humiliation with a bridge. If anyone here has been through something similar, or if you have a mother, a grandmother, a neighbor who could fall for this, don't let this story die in this room. Share it with those who need to hear. Share it. Each share is a hand pulling another woman from the abyss. There were no screams from me, no broken plate. There was the metallic sound of a reputation cracking. My daughter tried to recompose her smile, but her face no longer obeyed. The husband breathed through the corners, like someone looking for a door that had disappeared. And I, who never had a stage, stood up serene, as if the table were a tribunal and my voice the sentence. I felt the weight of years descending from my shoulders and transforming into a column. The silence, which had always hurt me, finally served me. Family is trust, someone repeated, almost in a whisper, like someone testing the phrase again, but now it no longer fit. I collected the note, fit the papers in the envelope, and held the glass again. I touched the crystal with my finger and let the fine sound cross the room. A toast, I said, to those who learn to read what's hidden in the fine print. I drank slowly. I saw looks avoid each other. I saw others face me with late respect. I saw masks slip like makeup in the rain. And while I felt the wine warm my throat, I knew the story didn't end there. Truth had echo, and with it would come something none of them expected to hear out loud. My daughter tried to sustain the theater. She forced a smile, but the makeup didn't hide the fury that vibrated in every muscle of her face. Mom, you're interpreting wrong. It was just to make your life easier, she said, but her voice sounded cracked like glass about to shatter. Her husband, sitting beside her, lost patience and dropped his glass on the table with force. The wine splashed on the white napkin, staining it like fresh blood. It went wrong. That's it. The plan went wrong. He let out without noticing the silence that fell. The conversation ceased. The celebratory toast became an impromptu tribunal. I saw looks turn to me, some full of surprise, others loaded with guilt for never having suspected. The daughter-in-law, who shortly before had laughed at the expense of my loneliness in the big house, lowered her eyes, unable to face me. One of the neighbors, who always treated me as the nice lady who knows how to cook good beans, murmured an "I'm sorry" that sounded displaced but sincere. My daughter, without the mask of dedicated daughter, revealed herself before everyone. Her eyes were hard, accusatory, and her now unvarnished voice screamed, "Ungrateful! After everything I did for you." The irony hurt like a stab. Me ungrateful. Me who gave up my own dreams to support hers. Me who faced looks of contempt just to see her grow up among books and opportunities. I breathed deeply. I didn't respond immediately. Silence was my sharpest blade. She expected screaming, she expected desperation. But she found calm. I rested my hands on the table, looked around and with a low but firm voice said, "You just heard from his mouth that there was a plan. It's not my tired eyes that invented this. It's their words that condemn them." A murmur went through the room like cold wind. Some guests stood up, others just shook their heads. The weight of shame was no longer mine. It was all on her shoulders. My daughter trembled, and for the first time it wasn't from contained anger. It was the fear of losing the respect she so sought from others. And in that instant, I realized that the power she thought she had over me had shattered. But the hardest part still remained, transforming that shock into real justice. In the following days, the house was filled with echoes from the dinner. There wasn't a corner in the neighborhood where they didn't whisper about what had happened. I never imagined that from her. I heard from a neighbor who always praised my daughter for her refined education. At the market, comments flew between aisles. They wanted to take everything from their own mother. I walked with my head held high, but I felt the wound still open. Not from shame, but from the pain of confirming that the blood I generated tried to tear me from the ground I conquered. My lawyer was already ahead of the case. We took authenticated copies of the documents to the notary, attached the teller's note and filed legal measures. Justice moved slowly, but each stamp and protocol was a brick in the wall that now protected me. The summons arrived at my daughter's door. I saw from afar when the officer knocked, and her husband opened the door with the same arrogance as always. The paper changed hands, and with it the weight of truth stopped being only on my shoulders. Gradually the narrative reversed. Those same mouths that before laughed at the confused old woman, now pointed fingers at my daughter. The social shine she so cultivated dimmed like a candle in the wind. She was no longer the exemplary daughter who cared for her mother, but the woman who tried to rob her. Comments that before diminished me were now turned to her. And I realized, with a mix of relief and sadness, that I didn't need to raise my voice. It was enough for truth to walk by itself. Still, inside me there was a greater need. I didn't just want to prove I wasn't fragile. I wanted to show before everyone that kindness isn't synonymous with weakness. That silence doesn't mean submission. And that a mature black woman carries within herself the strength of centuries, even when the world insists on seeing her as invisible. But I knew the most important step was still missing, transforming pain into public lesson so that others wouldn't fall into the same trap. I accepted the invitation from the neighborhood association to speak at a community meeting. They said my story could serve as a warning. First I hesitated. I had always gotten used to occupying the corners of the room, to speaking low so as not to bother. But something in me said it was time to transform scar into collective healing. I wore my simple dress again, arranged the scarf on my shoulders and walked to the association hall, where plastic chairs were arranged in rows in front of a microphone worn by time. When I entered, conversations fell silent. I saw familiar faces, Neighbors, mothers, curious young people, attentive elderly. Some still remembered the malicious whispers about my fragility. Now they came to hear the truth from my own mouth. I went up to the small stage and felt the cold in my hands. I breathed deeply. I want to tell you how I almost lost everything. To my own daughter, I began. And the silence that fell was deeper than any applause. I told about the contracts, the disguised laughter at the bank, the feeling of being reduced to nothing. I described the pressure on my arm, the pen heavy as a sentence, and the note that shone like a miracle. Some people widened their eyes, others brought their hands to their mouths. An elderly woman cried softly, as if recognizing her own pain there. With each sentence, I realized my voice was no longer just mine. It was the voice of many who had also been diminished, deceived, or silenced. I didn't need to theatricalize. I spoke calmly, without anger, but firmly. And when I finished, there wasn't loud applause, but something greater: respect. I felt looks loaded with tears, others with indignation. Young people filmed me with cell phones, murmuring that this story needed to run through the neighborhood, the city, the internet. And it was in that instant, before looks that recognized me for the first time not as a burden, but as strength, that I realized I had transformed my pain into a weapon so that other women wouldn't be hurt in silence. Today I walked to the bank with my head held high. The same security guard who before examined me with suspicion now greets me with respect, almost trying to hide the shame for having judged me. The manager, who smiled hastily for me to sign without reading, lowers his eyes when he sees me. I didn't need to raise my voice to conquer this different look. I just needed to show that I wouldn't be erased by my own family. My daughter lost more than she tried to steal. She lost what she can never recover: my trust. Money can be defended, the house can be protected with documents, but trust, that can't be bought back. Her husband disappeared from family meetings, unable to sustain the farce. And I, who so many times accepted the role of invisible, today am remembered not as the confused old woman, but as the woman who faced her own daughter and came out standing. I don't feel pleasure in their fall. Feel relief. Feel justice. My revenge was never to scream or destroy. My revenge was to survive, to expose, to transform humiliation into public truth. Each word I said at that association meeting continues to echo. I receive hugs from neighbors, messages from young people saying they share my story with their grandmothers. I discovered that my voice, once suffocated, now liberates other voices. And I learned something I want to leave marked here for those who listen to me now. Kindness is not weakness. Silence is not submission. And a mature black woman, even when they try to tear everything from her, carries within herself a strength that no one can erase. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, because we need, together, to keep alive the memory that our stories matter. Each click, each subscription, is a reminder that we're not alone, and that no one should ever underestimate the strength of those who learn to resist their entire lives. This is not just my victory. It's a warning to everyone. Never confuse love with naivety, nor silence with defeat. Because when the right moment comes, truth speaks louder than any lie.